right, everybody, welcome to Demystifying Cloud Migration and App Modernization with Datadog. I realize it's post-lunch, so everybody might be a little bit tired, that kind of thing. I'm not going to get you to stand up and do exercises or anything like that, but I see some blazers, I see some shorts. I'm wondering who's in the midst of a migration right now? Do we have anybody currently migrating to, okay, we got a couple. Do we have any Datadog clients in the house? Okay, so we got like 30%. We got some Datadog users. All right. And do we have anyone doing app modernization? So taking maybe a monolith, putting into containers, App Engine. Okay, so it's a mix, kind of all over the house. All right. I'm Ryan MacLean, if this clicker works. There we go, that is me. I'm a senior technical advocate at Datadog. I used to work at Samsung, and prior to that, I worked at a company called Stemcell. I've done a couple migrations, both on the workspaces side as well on the cloud side. I will say that I'm probably better at monitoring than I am at migration. And because of that, there's going to be quite a bit of Google content in here about migration and app modernization. But what I'll try to do is frame that in terms of monitoring and tell you what's important and why it's important and some of those steps that Google gives you in terms of migrating. So the main thing that I want to talk about prior to getting started is just about Datadog itself. So I've got a little blurb to say. I'll try not to read too much off the slides. But basically, what we're trying to do is solve complexity. So Datadog is a monitoring and analytics platform for those of you who are clients of ours yet. It provides full visibility across your organization. That's spanning end to end. So that's your front end, all the way down to your database. It could be in the cloud. It could be on-prem as you're migrating. It can even be the network, the cables basically that you're using to migrate things to the cloud to let you know what you are doing in terms of saturation, your metrics. But the idea is to enable everyone. That's ops, that's dev, that's even the business, to see full visibility into what's going on into your digital enterprise. So what you're doing on-prem, what you're doing in the cloud, let you know what's actually happening. So to put it simply, Datadog exists to solve complex visibility problems. And for those of you doing a migration, I think you know that actually making sure that what you've got in terms of the experience on-prem and what you got on cloud are the same, if not better, hopefully, is really, really key in terms of your success. So what you want to measure is that when you migrate things over, that things are either better or more efficient, basically. So what we're trying to do is give you a single platform for all your observability needs. All right, that was a blurb. We'll try to talk a little bit about my experience going on. There's a big quote up here. If you want to take a break and read through it, you can. For those of you who don't want to read, I'll make it pretty easy. So again, for the suits in the crowd, the main thing here is that we need buy-in. And using that buy-in, we can foster this modernization and migration effort. When you have something that's from the top up like that, it actually makes it a lot easier for people like me. I used to be an ops engineer for about 20 years. It allows me to say, hey, the VP said this, CEO said this. Let's all get under this one goal and get into the cloud. Now, it doesn't need to be all at once. It could be piecemeal, one at a time. It could be greenfield. It could be brownfield. It could be something that you're looking at in terms of legacy, trying to migrate over. But the main thing is, with that stakeholder basically buy-in for you to allow you to do these efforts and start to migrate up, allows you to make it a lot easier, basically. So we're going to start with the simple one. So we'll start with cloud migration. So cloud migration is kind of a big topic. You might also hear digital transformation kind of roped in there, depending on who you're talking to. The main thing is what you're trying to do is migrate possibly from cloud to cloud. Maybe it's from on-prem to cloud. Maybe it's from the edge to the cloud. Depends on what you're actually doing. But the main thing is figuring out what you've got currently prior to moving it is the main big step here. There is a workflow, however, and most of this content, so this awesome graphic is actually kind of lifted from Google's doc. So Google has a migration center that if you haven't seen, would highly recommend looking at. And in fact, in that platform, in that portal, a couple tools that are really good. One of them that stuck out to me was MFit. I haven't used that tool. I used something similar when I was working on it. But it'll allow you to go in and look at something like your VMware and say, hey, what's in here that I can easily migrate into Cloud Run? Hey, what's in here that might be able to migrate into containers? What can I put on EKS? Now, these 5 steps, they kind of go left to right. But honestly, there should be an arrow coming back to the beginning. Because what you want to do is carve off little pieces. And using those little pieces, you're going to learn from your success and then come back to it and say, hey, the lessons we learned last time was maybe we should have like a blue-green deployment for this, or perhaps we should migrate only like 50% of our users or 10% of our users. Or maybe we need to measure things a little bit better than we did last time. And using those little steps, when it comes back to do it again, it's a little bit easier. It's kind of like washing your hair, right? The instructions on the shampoo say rinse, lather, repeat. Now, there's no end to repeat. For those of you who are in the middle of migration projects, sometimes they can last years. The longest for me has been 3 years. Has anyone gone over 3 years in the audience? Okay, no one wants to raise their hand. It does happen. I think the average is about 6. Okay, so going from there, I think the main thing is, I'll keep it short, but I took those first 2 steps and kind of stuck them together. So I'll leave out the estimation. Well, let's assume that we're going to do that first. But what I'm going to do is combine the discovery and assessments phase. And at the end of the talk, I'll circle back to these steps, just so we talk about, like, once we talk about all the steps that we want to do, what was a big goal? What's a big takeaway? Now, for those of you who haven't started, I think one of the easiest pieces of advice is, like, the sooner you start, the easier it's going to be. At least starting with measurement is kind of the main one, but that's part of that discover phase. So, like, have a plan, know before you go, that kind of thing. So assess what you currently have, your digital estate. So where do you have things deployed? What's the most important to you? Is it like, are you going to take the big business critical app and move it first? Are you going to do that greenfield deployment and put it right into GKE and start off with Kubernetes native? It depends on what you're doing in your environment. It also depends on the risk and the risk tolerance that you have. So if you want to move your ERP over, which is what I did, might not be the best idea. However, if you've only got like one database server and it fails and your company goes down, maybe that's a big risk. So even though it's risky to move it, it's more risky if it goes down and your business stops. So it might be that that's what you want to look at. And it could be like a lift and shift. I know that's kind of a dirty word depending on who you're talking to. It could be a move and improve, which is sort of the way of saying the same thing. So you take maybe a VM, you take it from VMware, and you run it in VMware in GCP. And maybe from there you start whittling down what it actually does. But then you've got 2 copies instead of 1. So you're actually covering your bases, which is great. So then the next thing is having that plan, and then executing the plan, and then going back to your discover and assess phase for the next app that you're doing. Because chances are it's not just one thing, but once you've done one, it makes the next easier. Repeat, repeat, repeat. I think at the end of this, you're going to have like really clean hair, right? On the shampoo bottle, it doesn't say stop, just keep repeating. All right, so we'll go to the next one here. But the next part is that prep. So when Google talks about prep, they want you to make like a list basically saying, here are all the things that I have. Here are all the things that I want to migrate. On the Datadog side, what I would want to know is, what is the user experience? What is the operation experience? What is the dev experience? So if I migrate something over to the cloud and I've got CI/CD pipelines on-prem that point to on-prem servers, well, the next time I do a deployment, do I deploy to 2 locations? Do I deploy to 1? Which one do I do? What does that look like? What's a cutover? That kind of thing. So that's what I mean when I talk about preparation, but they're similar. They sort of dovetail together. So when I talk about it, and this is, honestly, it's a bit of an eye strain. I realize that there's a lot of points on here, but the main thing I want to say, you don't need to know what's on this, but on the left-hand side is your source, and your right-hand side is your destination. That's sort of the big idea. Now, in this case, we're migrating and modernizing at the same time. That might not work for everybody. It could be something that you want to do at the same time. So maybe you've got a monolith on-prem, and you want to start carving off little services, like a calendar service, a booking service. Maybe you're outsourcing like an email service, something like that. You can start carving those pieces off, but in some cases, it might be easier to do it, to do that lift and shift or that move and improve first, and then start carving them off. In some cases, it might be, maybe it's something you've got in the dev environment where the risk is really low, and doing all of this at once isn't a problem. It really depends on your organization. You're going to hear that a lot. That's a typical engineer response, right? It depends. But really, it does depend on your business, your risk tolerance, and your priorities. So what's more important to your business? What do you need to get done sooner? What are your fiscal goals, quarterly goals? What's your 1, 3, 5-year plan? How does this fit into that mix? So again, big chart. Left-hand side, we got the VMs. Right-hand side, we got Kubernetes. So essentially, as you're moving from your source to your target, what you want is, if we're to think of these about buckets, basically. So you've got like a water bucket here and a water bucket here. You want this one to go down and this one to go up. And I'm trying to line them up here. So you want less VMs and more containers. That's kind of what you're going at. Now, keeping that in mind, that's kind of like the ops approach, right? So we like to think about networks. We like to think about storage. We want to think about CPU, memory, that kind of stuff. But honestly, when it comes to the business users, what they care about is my app running? Like, yeah, the website's up. That's cool, but the website's serving a white page. I mean, it's up, but I can't really do anything. So for me, that doesn't really help. And sometimes what it can be is actually looking at your app and trying to figure out what those dependencies are. It could be a dependency map. We've got a tool that can do that for you. But it could be that actually just running an inventory through what you got in your digital estate can be that first step for you. So for example, I'll talk a lot about state-first approach that might not be the approach that you want. But when you think about what you're storing, generally what's important, what you're actually storing in terms of data is critical. Do we have it backed up? Do we have a DR plan, like a disaster recovery plan? Do we have maybe a BCP plan, like a business continuity plan? What do you have in terms of a priority for this application when you move to the cloud? Is it just that you've got 2 regions and then you're covered kind of thing? It really depends. Now, when we talk about migration, I like to think about this as a day 1. So when we talk about deploying applications, we might think of day 0 as planning, day 1 is deployment, day 2 is operation, and then depending on who you talk to, it might be day 100 or day 500. Could be that governance, that management, that security kind of aspect. Hopefully you're thinking about security this whole time, but like that's when it comes in. Like when am I doing my audits, that kind of stuff down the road. When it comes to app modernization and migration, on the migration part, that day 1 is going to be your actual migration. So when we're in day 1, similar to a regular deployment, we have a lot of concerns. Now the concerns for your migration might be something like, how fast am I moving my data? Or how long does it take for me to move an app? There's a bunch, hopefully you can read these here, yeah. So this is a state first approach, but it's like, if I've got 2 terabytes of data on-prem, what does that look like in the cloud in terms of how long it takes to go there? When I was talking about the buckets before, it's the same sort of thing. So if I've got a bunch of stuff on a filer, or maybe a SAN, or maybe just some raw disks sitting around on-prem, or maybe it's in a different cloud, how long does that take to come over? When do I say that it's done? And what does that look like? Now, a state-first approach is what I'm talking about here. Again, not recommended for everybody, but I'll give you a quick story about an ERP that I was moving. So the ERP used a database on-prem, and it was in one of those compact ProLiant kind of beige boxes, just sitting on a server rack. I see some smiles and nods here. I'm so sorry if I'm giving anyone PTSD, but when I looked at it, having recently joined the company, I realized, hey, this is a single point of failure, and this runs the entire organization. This is a problem. So the question was, hey, we have database backups, and can we restore them? And the answer was, yes, we have backups. No, we've never tested them. So that first thing for me, at least, was looking at that state. So the state for me was the database state. Now, for you, again, it might be your files. It might be something like you've got other little pieces of data here and there that actually run the, sorry, something came out of my mouth. Something in the organization that you need to migrate up. But what I want to say is when you think about what's important to the company, yes, the app's running, but 2, are we storing the data that the app is serving? Or when I modify things, is it writing back? And the reason why I say this is important is this is kind of the sort of drop dead events. So if you lose your data, this is a problem. If you haven't migrated that data over, if you don't have backups that you tested, if you're not backing up to the cloud or restoring from those backups in the cloud, the question is, what are you doing about that state? The reason I'm saying it this way is if we think about this as a triangle, the state's kind of on the bottom. So it's what props up your whole application. So again, if that web page loads and it's white, chances are it just didn't get the data that it needs. Now the second is that key app. So when we're talking about my experience, that key app was ERP. In this case, it was a database server and a front-end server, one of each. Pretty risky, pretty big deal if it went down. So for us, our first question was, hey, can we have a backup in the cloud that we can use as a business continuity sort of exercise? Maybe we can have a failure Friday, or once a quarter we'll fail over and see if it works. And we started that way as sort of just like a backup server to see, hey, when this happens, what works? And when we're doing these plans and doing these tests, what are we measuring? So for us, it was something like order entry. So how long does it take for us to do a generic test case order entry? Now, I hate to say it, again, as like someone who's a DevOps practitioner, I was doing all of this manually. In my defense, this is back in 2008, so things have gotten better at this point in time. But what I really want to say is as you're defining these tests for these applications, what you want to do is say, hey, this hits end-to-end. So it has a user entering an order. That order goes into the system. I can prove that it's there, and then on top of that, when I go to read the order, I can show that it actually worked. Now, these days, what you probably want to do is sort of wrap this. So it could be something like CI/CD. I've seen people use and abuse CI/CD for this kind of test. If, again, the Datadog answer might be something around synthetics. So if you want to do like an end-to-end test that simulates this as part of a test suite, you could do it. But also you could write like a test harness around it too. It doesn't necessarily need to be that complicated. It could also be one of those checklists like I was talking about before. And we legitimately had timers that we were using to see, hey, is this faster, is it not faster, that kind of thing. It's okay. I think the main thing is taking the approach that you've got, that you know, and starting there. The sooner, the better, as opposed to waiting and taking longer. All right, so monitoring, right? So when we're doing these test case end-to-end, what does monitoring look like for a migration? I'll talk about networking a little bit here because I think a lot of people will discount the importance maybe of networking. And as a former network engineer, I guess maybe that's one of the lenses that I use when I think about migration. So you probably have hopefully one internet connection, maybe two backup internet connection. You might have like a VPLS, MPLS, that kind of thing. So some sort of private network connection to your cloud or maybe to your sites. But the unfortunate realization for us was, even though you've got this really fast link, there's latency that comes into play, but as well as where you're landing in, the landing zone in Google needs to actually have the bandwidth for the resources that you're getting to get the amount that you're sending to it. What I'm trying to say is, like, if you're moving into an instance, maybe the instance has I/O limitations or an I/O ceiling, they'll say, hey, you can write to a disk this fast, but you need to make sure that you can write to the disk as fast as you're sending data to it in order to make sure that you're getting ROI on that pipe that you just purchased to make sure you can migrate faster. So don't just think about one side of that equation. We were looking at the page before. Think about the other sides as well when it comes to your actual your monitoring of the thing here. So I'm going to start with the easy one. So logs, traces, and metrics I think are pretty important. Depending on who you talk to, they may have put those in all three of these. So logs, traces, metrics here. For me, what I'd like to say is that's kind of table stakes. So when I talk to you about CPU, memory, disk I/O, that kind of thing, generally your business doesn't care about that too much. When I talk about traces, like code performance, that kind of thing, your devs are going to care for sure. They'll want to know, hey, I'm moving to microservices. In the monolith, there was no delay between my service. Why is there now like a 1 millisecond delay every time I make a call? What can I do to make that better? Or maybe I've moved to a new database engine, and I'm noticing that the sizing could be a little bit better. The traces will allow you to actually drill into that and show you what's slow, what's not slow for different portions of your code. Now, the important thing for me, I guess, and you kind of got it, is like the network testing part, but the end-to-end testing, and I'm mentioning synthetics here, but that's really, really important. So I talked about order entry, and that was like in an ERP. If you're running something like an e-commerce service, for example, or like a WordPress service, or something where you're doing CRUD operations. So you're entering data, then users will read that data, they may update that data, and then delete that data. So those CRUDs, those create, read, update, delete, those things are easy tests, actually. So hey, I've just restored my database, I just put the web front end up there, I've got a new cache, but what I want to do is test, hey, can I create an order, create a blog post, can I read the order that I just created? Then can I update it? Can I modify? Are the permissions correct? That kind of thing. Is the firewall okay? And then can I delete it? Or maybe you want to try to delete it and fail. So you're testing permissions, that kind of thing. But that CRUD test suite, even though it seems really, really simple, and you might even already have it in a test harness, you can reuse that as a post-migration test or even a pre-migration test. And I say this because at one point in time, our database was locked. And we tried to do something, and then we realized, like, hey, it's not working. Let's see if it works over here. And it turned out there was a problem that we had on both sides. And it's just that we hadn't tested it on-prem prior to testing in the cloud. It's just more of a user error. So as we were trying to do two things at once, the main thing that was important was testing both sides of the story. All right, and then I talked a little bit about ingress and egress, but really networking when it comes to moving a lot of data or maybe moving portions of data and keeping a web server over here, that ingress and egress are going to be really important to you on the network side. If you haven't heard these terms before, that's okay. So ingress means coming in, egress means leaving. So data coming into Google, for example, your migration target, or data leaving Google, in fact. So let's say you've got like a web server on-prem using a caching layer, but you're talking to Google, maybe that egress from Google is something that you need to worry about as well. All right, I'm almost done, I promise. We'll keep this really, really short. We don't need to talk forever. I saw some people leave already, so if I'm already boring you, it's almost done, I promise. The last one's going to be optimization. Now, this is really an eye test. I will say that this is on the migration site, but I will walk through this for you. So the main thing is we're going to start this loop. So for those of you who can't see it, the top left is we're going to start the loop. And the reason I say this is because we're going to loop through it multiple times. It's just like that washing the hair example. So we're going to go through the loop. We're going to say, hey, what's your current environment? What are you currently doing on a day-to-day basis? What really makes sense in terms of users? So let's say that order example that we're talking about takes maybe 5 seconds. So that baseline or that low watermark for you is, hey, when someone enters an order, it shouldn't take longer than 5 seconds, or maybe not much longer than 5 seconds. And as you move on, you're going to look at like, hey, what about our environment? Like how many VMs do we have? How many servers do we have? How many front ends do we have? That kind of thing. And it seems pretty simple, but actually having an inventory of what you're doing is really key when it comes to moving to the cloud. Now, it could be that you're not using tagging in VMware. I know a lot of the shops that I used to work with weren't necessarily up to date on their tags. But this might be a good opportunity for you to say, hey, these are all similar web servers. We can tag them as we move. And this could be one of those move and improve. So we're moving stuff up from VMware to VMware in the cloud with GCP, but perhaps this is a good time to tag. I don't know, just saying. And the next is assessing your team. So like, if you've got a bunch of teams that are already doing work and you decide, hey, let's just throw some migration stuff on top of that, it's going to be okay. It might be worth thinking about planning this out as a regular project and carving off some time for your teams. It could be that you want to reach out to Google to see if they can help. And in my case, what happened was they were actually able to recommend a partner that I worked with. And using that partner was actually, it was kind of like a super skill. You know when you get a really powerful sword in a video game, or you learn a new move, or you've like got a new trick and you're like, hey, this is amazing. For me, that felt like a superpower. We had a partner that we could rely on that really helped us deal with management as well as talk about what we needed in terms of migration. All right, and I'm just going to go to the last one here. The rest of these would take forever if I got through them. And then the next is assess this loop. So once we've gone through this one time, what we want to do is say which one of these steps was the most impactful for us and what can we do for it. Now, on the Datadog side for monitoring, obviously, the main thing for me is making sure that end-to-end for you is still working, but also that you're doing things like migrating maybe over to maybe more dynamic infrastructure. So on demand, as you get a lot of traffic, maybe you want to be able to sprawl out. Or perhaps it's instead of manually creating servers, you're starting to move over to something like Terraform, perhaps, Pulumi, infrastructure as code, but a way of automating what you're doing so you're not doing it all by hand and can start applying these policies to the org. Again, this is in the Google Migration Center. Can't recommend it enough. It's great. That's what I'm framing a lot of this talk in. Now, again, back to that migration workflow. So to take that big graph and sort of distill it down into those 4 steps, because I think this is the easiest takeaway. So what you're going to do is estimate, discover, assess, plan, and migrate. Those big steps that you saw there, like all the arrows going around, those are just the big steps for all those areas. All right.